is we actually teach Doctor of Audiology students. Oh, by the way, we have the live transcript turn on. So if you guys can let me know if you guys can read the closed captioning, it'll be okay. It should be on as I speak. And our department has a Doctor of Audiology, which I'm the graduate coordinator with. Um, um, Okay, great. Caption works great. And then also we have a clinic. We have two. We have two. So here is the chat. Okay, so if you want to go out to the chat and make comments, and Adria will monitor that. She will help us collect. She will help me collect the questions later on. And then we actually have two clinics. We have one clinic in San Francisco, one in Stockton. I actually don't know how many of you are audiences, patients, or friends from Stockton or from SF campuses. So, hopefully all of you have worked with Gail, Stephanie, and Minura, the great audiologists in our Stockton campus. We also have the San Francisco campus, and that we also have clinical faculties, research faculties, and I am actually one of them too. I spend my time in mainly the academic part, mainly the teaching, the research part, but I usually spend one day a week in the clinic, about one semester, a couple of months in the summer. So there, okay. Today's agenda. So I'd like to, because of the audience, going to be very diverse in terms of the age, experiences, you guys' knowledge background. So I'd like to talk about the topic of sound and brain, starting from a basic review of ears, the brains, how we actually hear, that kind of stuff. And then move on to different aspects of the brain, how the brain changes when there is a lot of sound or when there are not enough sound, and what we can do and what science have been shown to be working to improve the function of your brain. Okay, and then we're gonna do a little bit of summary and suggestions. I think the talk is gonna be around 40 minutes. Speaking of which, let me start my timer. All right. 40 minutes, and we'll have about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes question and answers, okay? So what I wanted to do today is actually talk about not only the review of what we know so far about our ears, about our brain, but also what recent science researchers, because I myself, I got my PhD and AUD from Ohio University. I've been doing neuroscience for a long time. What do we know about sound and its relationship with brain in the past 10, 5 years, and 20 years? And the more give you, all of you guys today, an overview of what do we know, okay? So before we do that, we definitely need to understand how, have a basic understanding of how hearing works in essence, okay? So this is where I'm gonna start. First thing is, what do we hear? Now, what are you looking at here is the first class I teach my audiology students, literally the first class. What you're looking at is a sine wave. It's the pure tones. For those of you who have done hearing tests, that's what you hear in the audiometers. A little bit more complicated than that, but that's a mathematically defined sine wave. It's the simplest sound out there. Vibration of your ear, vibration of my vocal folds. Any sound you hear, music, speech, comes from a combination of these sine waves. Okay, so pretty much every sound is combined by different, is made of a different combination of these sine waves. Now, different sounds, we perceive them. A lot of times, most important to us, for a lot of people, are speech understanding. You talk to your children, you talk to your parents, you talk to grandchildren, whatever. You listen to the news. Yeah, you talk to your neighbors, speech, okay? The other kind that are also very important to us are music. Now, music is broader in terms of the frequency range, and also in terms of the loudness range. A lot of people love research. However, one major challenge nowadays with the with what we have in the research or in the industry is that things that work well to help with speech don't work that well with music. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But music is a great tool to help us hear better. Okay, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that too. So music is another kind of sounds. The last kind of sounds that are a little different is noise. There are two kinds of noise. One is the mathematically defined noise. Sounds like shh, sounds like that. Those are mathematically random. There's no periodicity. There's no pure tones. Okay, there's nothing like these things in there. So it's purely random. Another kind of noise is what we call psychoacoustically defined noise. What I mean by that, like around what I'm talking to you right now, this is a speech sound, right? My voice is a speech sound. You want to hear it, and I guess that's why you joined today. But my children next door, they'll be like, why are you talking again? They don't want to hear my voice. They don't want to hear my speech. So to them, my speech right now can be a noise. All right, so that's psychologically or psychoacoustically defined by noise. Another thing you can think of as about these sounds is that I like racing cars or like motorcycles going through down tunnel. You make a lot of noises. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. Those sounds, or like a NASCAR or a Formula One motorcycles. I love those noises. But my wife, my family, everybody else hates them. All right. But I love them. But those sounds are physically, acoustically noise. But I love them. How do I tell the difference? It is my brain actually telling you, oh, you're going through a tunnel. You want to crack up your motorcycle's noise to hear that backfire. All right, or you hear some racing car or like a Mustang or Camaro down the street. I pay attention to those sounds. Those sounds are, to a lot of other people, they are noise, but to me, I love those sounds. They're not noise. So once again, but how do you tell that apart? It's my brain that's making the calls. All right. Moving on. I'm sure you guys have seen this somewhere in your talk to your audiologist, in some kind of a webinar talk, and all the time. So I'm just going to very, very briefly go over that with you. What are you looking at is called what we call an audiogram. All right. So from the left to right, you have lower pitches to higher pitches. At the top, soft sounds. At the bottom, loud sounds. And you have a little bit of a purple area here. You see all the letters. Those are the English letters. Say like these guys over here are the F, those sounds. Or here up to the left, those are the vowels, the A's, the O's. So basically, wherever your hearing falls, okay, like this is a very typical aging-related hearing loss. We see that all the time. Wherever your symbol falls, you can have anything above that symbol, above your line. Everyone has different line. Anytime you have sounds above that line, you will have a hard time detecting it. And then things below that line, you can probably detect it. Now I will go back to here, and you see that if you have a line that's very typical, that goes like this, all right, you're gonna miss a lot of sounds over here without any kind of help, and that's typical. All right, that's typical. But that's how we detect sounds. Now, the next part is how our ears hear sounds or detect sounds. I'm sure you have seen this too somewhere. Number one, hi Cheryl. What you can see here is that well, typical division of the ear. You have your outer ear, your ear canal, with then your middle ear, the tympanic membrane, the ossicles, and then to your cochlear, which is the inner ear. Beyond the cochlear, you have your nerves, which I'm going to talk about in a minute about what's the difference between detecting a sound and hearing a sound. So your ears, your outer ear, middle ear, inner ear, the cochlear, they're more or less, for the lack of a better word, responsible for detecting the sounds. For example, your cochlear, right? Your cochlear right here. Cochlear is responsible for transforming all the vibration, all the sounds that your outer ear, middle ear, these guys, all right, they collect all the sounds and send it to cochlear. What the cochlear will do is that the cochlear will send the information, transform the vibration, the acoustic sounds, to a neural signal, and send it to the nerve and to the brain. The next slide you're seeing here is, I really like this slide because it shows where cochlear and the auditory nerve, okay, if you guys can see that, the cochlear nerve, this is the connection between your cochlear, the detection, the ear part, to the brainstem here. Now, this graph actually shows acoustic neuroma, which is a condition, a tumor, benign tumor. Some people have. I actually teach this class. I teach the pathology class, but I like this graph not because of the tumor. I like the graph where it shows, because it shows the connection between your cochlear and your neural system, the central nervous system. The cochlear transforms the sound, acoustic, mechanical energy into neural impulse to your brain. You see the brainstem right here, all right? So once the cochlear does its job to transform sound into neural impulse, what's next? It enters the information. It's no longer a sound, okay? No longer a sound. The information in your central nervous system are neural signals. So typically you have your cortex, cerebellum, and then you have brainstem. Sounds are going to be transformed again from cochlear to a neural signal, neural impulse, to your brainstem, midbrain, and the cortex, the auditory cortex, the brain up top, okay? That happens to any sound and every sound. You have your cochlear receive information here and send it along all the way from your brainstem all the way to the brain, okay? The brain is where the sound is quote unquote processed, okay? The ears detect the sound and translate the sound into neural signals that your brain is able to interpret. Now, which part of the brain you may say? For auditory input, we have this section here, the red section. This is actually the red, and over here, a little bit of here. Let me change it to a pointer here. It's actually somewhere here. I don't know if you can see that. It's what we call the primary auditory cortex, okay? Let me change another color if it's a little hard to see. Maybe red, black on this one. Yeah, here, okay? This is the portion of the cortex that deals with a lot of auditory information. And we're gonna see that a lot in today's talk. We're gonna see this part of the brain can and will actually change with more or less auditory input, okay? So, and obviously you can see other parts of the brain, you have, other sense of touches or the sight, right? The vision here, balance, coordination, everything. But we're gonna focus a little bit more on the hearing part. Now, to summarize the first portion is that how do we hear, okay? In general, your ears, your outer ear, middle ear, the part where you have your hearing aids, your cochlear implant, they are responsible for detection of the sound. Now we're gonna moving on to the brain, talking about how your auditory process, how your brain processes the sound. I'd like to introduce you guys to the 4 process that our students will be taught over and over again, is the auditory process, okay? The 4 stages of those. Number 1 stage is detection, okay? I'll give you an example. If I say hola, or say bonjour, or say ni hao, right? I'll give you an example like that. So your ears should be able to detect that I said something. There's a sound. That's detection. That's your ears, right? The second layer is, and that detection primarily happens in your ear. The second layer of processing is discrimination. So you know that when I say hola, or say ni hao, or guten tag, whatever, right? You know, it is different. It's not English. Okay, it's not English. So you can tell it's different from what you're used to. Another kind of discrimination, if I say duck versus a duck, okay, you know there's difference in the vowel. All right, so be able to tell the difference between two sounds. That's one more step. Then over that, be able to detect there's a sound. Now we're talking about being able to differentiate two sounds or three sounds. Know that it's something different. This part happens at the ear and part of the brain. The next two steps are a little more involved. The third one is called identification. What do I mean by that? When I say 你好, okay, you know it's not English. You can tell it's a sound. You know it's not English. But what language is that? Do you know that? Some people do, some people may not. Or when I say hola or something, or like what I say, guten Tag, for example. You know that's German, you know that's Spanish, you know that's Mandarin Chinese. That's identification. Being able to associate a sound, not only detect, not only to differentiate that sound from different sound, be able to identify that sound. Okay, knowing that's Mandarin Chinese, that's German, that's whatever. That happens not in your ear. That happens in the brain. Only your brain can do that. Lastly, all right, obviously the last step is comprehension, understanding what the other person is saying. Say, hola means hello, right? Ni hao means hello, everything means hello. But not only you have to be able to detect, tell them apart, but also knowing what language it is. Lastly, understand that language. Okay, this part, almost 2.5 of the 3 of these 4 steps of process happen in your brain. Okay, so your ears only help with the detection part. You know, don't get me wrong, it's important. If you don't have sounds, there's nothing to be processed. That's absolutely important. Okay, but keep in mind, detection is only the first step in this whole process. So literally the first step in this process. It's important, but it's only a portion of the whole hearing part. And obviously, there are a couple of other auditory functions that we're not going to go into there too much. Things like localization, things like closure. I'll give you an example. If your grandchildren or children tell you, if you ask them, hey, if you ask your children, your grandchildren, hey, what do you want to have for lunch? What are you going to say? A lot of them will say, sounds like, You know, if I say, can you guys figure out what I meant by that? You need to have the ability to not only detect as a sound, but to have the cognitive function and the auditory function to figure out that sound. Just because of the pitch change, what I'm saying is, I don't know, okay? But you literally don't hear the word, I don't know either. What I heard was just, It's just a single sound with different pitch changes. That portion of linking between to I don't know, that your ears can help you with that. It has to be your brain. That makes sense. So that's the part that's why I'm saying that more or less is actually your brain that's doing the hearing. Okay, so hopefully it is a very brief introduction, but hopefully it give you an introduction to this concept of what are we doing here. Now, the next part, I want to go into this whole thing about recent research in the brain's plasticity in terms of when there's more sounds, different kind of sound, long-term training of sounds, your brain do a better job at dealing with that sound. Okay, we're going to briefly talk about babies, talk about infants, children, younger adults, and older adults. All right, and then we're going to talk about different studies based on that. So our brain can and will change, depends on what you put in there. Okay, in your brain, your central nervous system is a very, very plastic process. It's very adaptive. And you can actually not just only see the functional change, but also physiological change, meaning that the volume of your brain, the neural firing rate of your brain, the speed of processing, the amplitude it process sound, they literally have physical changes after a certain input. Okay. The first study I want to show you is I did that with my mentor when I was in a PhD student. What we did was that we collected brainwave from babies, newborn babies that were born in China and that were born in America, which, one country speaks English, one country speaks Mandarin, but the Mandarin Chinese has a feature that does not exist in English language. I mean, let me try to play this thing here. Let me see if you guys can hear this. Can people hear that? Oh. If you can hear it, just type in yes or no.
Yes, we can hear it.
Awesome. So when you play this, this is a pitch. This is a pitch that's very prominent in tonal languages like Cantonese, Chinese, Mandarin, a lot of other languages too. What we did was we played that very specific feature in a language. We played that to babies, neonates, newborns, literally born just 3 days, to different babies born with different language backgrounds. What we found was that they are, if you see the response here, they're pretty comparable listening. So babies, when they're just born, they're, regardless of the language background, their parents, right? So everybody is, in a sense, everybody is born like a blank sheet of paper, okay? It's pretty comparable. What's interesting is that in adulthood, American adults who don't speak that language, which contain this specific feature, you can look at how that compares to Chinese adults who speak that language 20 years, 30 years. You see the difference is dramatic, okay? You see that how this 20 years of 30 years of language input in this particular population, this Mandarin Chinese particular population, increase your brain's ability to process the sound. In contrast, look at this. Look at the baby's response compared to their adults' responses in English-speaking population. Not only the response did not increase, you can actually see that it's actually degraded a little bit. Okay, so what that shows is that when we were born as babies, everybody's neural systems and all pretty close to each other, regardless of language input. But if you speak a language, if you listen to a specific language feature for a long time, your brain actually changes. Not only that you understand it, obviously, you're going to be able to speak the language, understand the language, but what's more fascinating is that your brain actually is different than someone who does not speak that language, literally, because that's what we found, that different, you can do analysis on that, but your brain is actually literally different than the other group. Another study I want to show you is published 2017, where they collected a whole bunch of children, all right? They give them long-term, and those some children have, this black may not be the best color, I will see. Let's see, let's try do blue, all right? So they have piano training, no training, and in children, and look at their brain, okay? With tonal perceptions, with pitch perceptions, kids who are undergone piano music training, their brains' activities, the magnitude of those are way better or more than those who do not have similar. Now, obviously, these are age matched, no hearing loss, those kind of things. So the only difference is music training. So what does that tell you? When your children, when your children, grandchildren, when they are younger, music training gives them a little bit of an edge in terms of, at least, not everything, but at least tonal perceptions and pitch perceptions. So if your children are interested in music, I would say go ahead. Doesn't hurt. Actually, it helps their brain to grow better a lot. This is only talking about auditory perception. There's no guarantee that, they're going to be smarter or whatever. But the idea is that music certainly enhances what we call a neural processing, okay? Neural processing, and it improves speech perception. Moving on. So, by the way, I'm going over these talks, these studies pretty quickly, just to give you guys an overview. All right. And I'm trying to use the languages that it's pretty, hopefully, easy to understand for the audience here, because I have no idea everyone's background. So hopefully, if you have questions, feel free to ask at the end. So here, this is a study coming out of Northwestern University 2014. What they did is that they recruited children with some learning disabilities, at risk factors, those kind of things. What they did is that they trained them with short-term music training. All right, short-term music training. Those are not musicians or any music training. Just give them like a couple of weeks, couple of days of music training. And what they found is that, look at this. Before the training, after a year, okay, hold on. After a year, after 2 years, the training group, you see how their brain's ability to code sounds, to code certain sounds, how much that is better than those who did not. And at the very beginning, you see that how they're pretty close to each other. Okay, after 1 year of training, this guy is better than the other guy, and after 2 years training, I think it's pretty evident that for these kids, even they are just they're at-risk kids, music training give them actually help their brains help their brain do better at the neural signals. So I have a question here, Adria, if you don't mind, collect these questions. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability later, okay? And then moving on. So, okay, that's children. What about adults? This is the study published by Dr. Gabriela Musacchia, very close colleague of mine. She's actually the chair of our department. She did this when she was a PhD student or finishing her PhD out of Northwestern. What they found is that musicians, once again, I mentioned this before, musicians in their adulthood, young adulthood, their responses, their neural processing of speech and music, look at this. They're much better than their non-musicians counterparts at all frequencies, at different timings, different sounds. This is the duh sound. This is duh sound with audio visual. This is only the audio. Look at how musician groups, the left panel, are stronger than non-musician panel. So these are for younger adults with music training. The brains are doing better job at processing these sounds. And keep in mind, I will emphasize this over and over again. These are not behavioral studies. These are not like, hey, musicians, you play a tone, you tell us what's the difference. These are studies that literally look at your brain. These are physiological changes in your brain, the actual physical changes in your brain, okay? Moving on to more of adulthood learning second language. This is the study that me and my colleagues just published last year. What we found was that we collected a group of younger adults learning second language in their adulthood. You know, everybody knows that for a kid, it's always easier to learn a language when you're younger, right? Young kids absorb a language a lot. But everybody thinks, oh, it's a lot harder to learn a second language, to learn another skill when you're adulthood. What are we showing here is that even when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, when you actually try to learn another language, your brain actually makes that difference. You actually make a difference. So what you see here is the left panel is native speakers of Mandarin, and then to the very right panel is non-native speakers. Okay, in the middle is the second language learners. So they are in their 20s, they're 20s. They just started learning Mandarin. They're studying to that, and you can see their brains doing a better job than the non-native speakers. Obviously, not as good as native speakers, but their brains are actually making a change. That's what's important. Even if when you're older young children, obviously, there's this period of golden period for learning language, right? Even if you're older, like past that, 20s, 30s, your brain can still change if you put in the effort to learn something new, to learn that new language. And this theme, we're going to talk about that again later. your brain is actually plastic throughout the age spectrum, from very young to very old. Your brain can always change. Obviously, when you're younger kids, your changes are faster. That's a different story. But you can't still the brain can still change. A couple of last slides on the fact of a changing brain when people are older. So here we have older musicians. They tend to have a higher neural responses. What you see here is that this group, all right, when they have, you guys can see my pointer, when they have a lot of music training when they are older, these are above, this is a study coming out of Northwestern University. When they have a lot of music training, their brains are responding faster, way faster than those who don't have music training, okay? Same thing here. Their responses are much stronger than those who don't have music training, right? But okay, so there's that. So what we established is that when there is a lot more training without hearing loss, when there's a lot more sound coming to your ear, music or pitches and whatever, they will improve or make your brain better, okay? And just better in a way that to process that language specifically, doing that better. Now, what about you when you don't have enough sound, okay? What about when there is, what do we call hearing loss? When the detection part is not detecting enough sound. When your ears is damaged, when there's noise, when there's chemical, when there's drugs, when there's aging process, hearing loss happen. Okay, when your ears are damaged, there will be less sound going to the brain. What about the brain? So what about the brain? When there's less sound coming in, will there be any changes? And if there's any changes, what kind of changes? And if there's changes, what's the functional impact? So the first study I want to show you is primates, monkeys, and all that, all that. So what they did is that they exposed them to noise. So here, no noise. To the right, noise, and they look at their brain's responses. Look at how these are the brain waves, the monkey's brain wave. Okay, if you see here, these waves have much higher amplitude than over here. You see that? You see the difference? So 10,000 hertz, 10 kilohertz. You see that this is much bigger than this one. So when you in animal models, when the hearing losses are damaged, when the ears are damaged, you actually see much reduced brain waves. Another study I want to show you is about the cells, the receptor cells in the cortex, where the nerve synapse happens, right? So the ear sends information to the brain. Some receptors, some cells, they are responsible for receiving information from the ear. Okay, so that's what they were looking at. What they found is that when there is hearing loss, keep in mind sensorineural hearing loss and noise, aging, all that's sensorineural hearing loss. The damage is actually more or less in the ear. What they found is actually the brain's receptor. Okay, the brain's receptor in the auditory cortex, you have less of that as after the sensorineural hearing loss. What that mean is that although the loss is in the ear, the brain actually have less cells to receive information from the ear. Okay, let alone processing that. Just the part of receptors in the brain, the count is just less. Okay, there's that. Another study I want to show you is very much on the cortex with humans. What you can see here is with a male and female with high frequency and low frequency loss, there is a significant correlation between more loss you have, lesser of activity in your brain's activity. Okay, and there's that. Another study I want to show you is that when people are getting older with hearing loss, the age-related hearing loss, compared to their younger counterparts, now their brain's activity in encoding dynamic frequency. What is dynamic frequency? It is when I say the pitch changes. When I say, "Oh, you're here," versus "you're here," or "you're here," right? When you have different tones, you interpret emotions, you interpret these kind of things differently. The ability to detect dynamic frequency change, when you have hearing loss, especially when it's aging related, you see how different it is compared to the younger. And this is the brain's response, okay? Another study, this is coming out of University of Maryland, Samara Anderson, that's a colleague of mine. What they found was that very interesting study. They had three groups of studies of participants: young normal hearing, older normal hearing, which is hearing normal. The audio one, so for the older normal hearing, that group, they don't need their hearing aids because they're quote unquote normal. And then older hearing impaired. Okay, so age matched, older but hearing impaired. What do you find is that their brain and brainstem's ability to track words, transient words, like say "duh," right? There's a "duh," there's "up" part, the form, the consonant and the vowel, the transient part. You can see how much difference each group differ from each other. And what's more interesting is that the brains, the neural responses from the groups that are actually older with hearing loss, you see how the gray bars is always, all right? The gray bars is always lower than the black bar, which is like even if you consider age as a factor, when you have hearing loss, your brain's activity to track that is lower than those who don't, okay? Another study. This is talking about your cognitive effort. So what they did is that they give them a lot of auditory task, get a lot of tasks then you have a group of normal hearing and you have a group of hearing impaired older adults, and they look at basically how their cortex is activated. So that if you have a lesser activation, it means that you're not exerting too much energy, too much effort. But what you can see here is with the hearing impaired group, they're exerting, obviously a lot more than the normal hearing age-matched counterpart. Okay, so a lot of hearing impaired people will notice that they put a lot of effort to try to hear other people, try to understand. That's exactly what your brain is doing. That's evidence here. Okay. I'm going through these things pretty quickly, so if you have any questions, feel free to answer at the end. Now, with the last two slides on this, I'd like to talk about a little bit more than auditory processing. This is a study coming out of Frank Ling's group in Johns Hopkins University. They have a very good, well-designed study with hundreds, thousands of people. What they found was that control for age, gender, race, education, diabetes, everything. When you have hearing loss, when people have hearing loss in their older and all that age range, when the loss is about, like if you see 0 to 20 mild loss, there isn't much of an increased probability of increased probability of dementia. But this curve increased quite dramatically when you have a loss that's starting from 40 or 50 dB, and it goes up pretty quickly. Now, I want to mention that this is the likelihood curve, okay? I'm being very technical, very sciencey here. It's not a causal relationship. That does not mean that if you have hearing loss, you will have dementia. That's not how it works, right? It's the probability, it's the likelihood of the likelihood with hearing loss, the likelihood that lead to dementia, control everything else, right? Will increase. Again, it's not. I'm not trying to. It's not about causal. It's about the likelihood, the probability of that increase. Okay, but it does increase dramatically after the hearing loss is getting worse and worse. Lastly, they did a very good job. They did a very interesting study, follow up two groups of elderlies, two groups of older adults. One group had no hearing loss. The other group had hearing loss. So the no hearing loss is dashed line. The hearing loss is the solid line. They follow them year after year. At the 5-year mark, you can see these two groups. Okay, you guys see my circle here. These two groups, they are pretty close. There's no difference. Okay. However, 6 years later, 5 years, 11th year, 6 years later, you see how the normal hearing is declining. Normal hearing group is declining. But the hearing loss group declining way faster than the normal hearing group, okay? And both of these are I think these are what is this dementia sort of cognitive function tests. Okay, so what you see here is that it's a process, and then when hearing loss occurred, if you don't do anything to it, if you don't do anything to it, the cognitive decline that is naturally happening is going to be declining much faster than when you have either normal hearing or you do something to help with the hearing aids. So now the next part, so that I don't want to end there. Obviously, I don't want to end my talk over there because that's going to be pretty depressing for everyone. It's like, all right, hearing loss, my brain is going to be degrading. What can we do? Is there something we can do about it? It's amazing how adaptive our brain is and can do. Is that regardless of the age, regardless of whether you already have hearing loss, your brain is actually still very active. It's still very plastic. So what I'm going to do, the third part of this, is that I'm going to try to introduce a few studies that look at this, and then to sort of how if our brain can recover, and if there's any kind of improvement we show from hearing loss. So the first study I'm going to show you is once again from University of Maryland, is that they had they have a group of people who had two groups of people. They're both 6 months apart. One group had 6 months of hearing aids. This N1, P2, those are your brain waves from your cortex. What you see here is that pre and post, before and after 6 months, the hearing aid use, the experimental, the red line here, the experimental group, their brain's amplitude, their brain's brainwave amplitude significantly increased after 6 months of use. Whereas the control group, you see that, the control group, they're fairly flat or even going down. Same period of time, similar hearing loss. The only difference is use hearing aids or not. What it shows you is that if you keep pumping sound to your brain will do its job, do what it's supposed to do, to pick up the word, to do better at detecting sound. And it came out 2018, I think it's a tremendous, okay? Another study you are showing here is a short-term, even short-term training. So this group, what they did was that they had, okay, so if you look at the left side, it's the aided ear with hearing aids, the right side is control ear. The black dots, they are 5 to 7 days apart. So the circle dots, they are the baseline, the solid dots, they are 5 to 7 days apart. You can see if you use hearing aids on your ear, your brain's responses, okay, the brain responses can start to separate just after 5-7 days. Whereas the control ear, you see that they don't really separate. You don't see that much of an improvement. Whereas here, you see all the separation of your brain's activity in terms of soft sounds, loud sounds, all those kind of things. They start to separate as soon as 5-7 days of hearing aid use. Okay. Now, what about cortex? Okay, this is a study coming out of 2018. Remember the graph I showed you, the part of the brain that's responsible for auditory function is right here. Okay, this is called what do we call primary auditory cortex. What you see here is that after 1 year of auditory rehab with hearing aids, meaning hearing aids, hearing trainings with the audiologists, and all those kind of things, your audiologists, well-trained audiologists will help you do. After a year of rehab and wearing hearing aid, you see this specific portion, which is responsible for your auditory activities. You see that improves dramatically. You can we can talk about the detail on the data, but you can see it's actually getting more active. It's literally getting more active. Okay. Second to last study I want to show you is not just hearing aids. A lot of adults or children, they have severe and profound hearing loss that the thing we can help them is more of a cochlear implant. So this study, I believe, is on children, 2013, is that after a certain period of cochlear implantation, cochlear implant, by the way, is a device that's replaced the function of a cochlea, essentially. It just directly sends signal to the central nervous system. What you can see, that same thing. This region of the brain is getting more than before. Okay, so you give the brain more sounds, it actually can get better, even if the brain started with a sort of damaged or lesser stage. Last study I want to show you is, I found it very interesting in 2016, is that they looked at effects of hearing aids, cochlear implants on cognitive function and depression among older adults. What they found was that before and after 1 month of auditory training with hearing aids, you see how much of this score improves. Okay, and keep in mind, this is or your brain's doing the work. Okay, you see all of these things improve after just some use of hearing aids. And also, what's I found it very fascinating is that this GDS, that's a score of geriatric depression score. You see how before and after cochlear implant, which is also another kind of sound, you see the score decrease. Okay, you see 1 year after implantation, the depression score decrease from whatever number to a lower number. Okay, so I went through all of these pretty quickly. We're about time, and I hope that I did a good job controlling time. So I want to give a brief summary over what we discussed today. Number one is it's not just the ears, but it's actually our brain that actually does most of the hearing. Your ears is doing the detection part, the discrimination, identification, and the comprehension, a lot of other functions. They're actually done by the brain. Okay, and that's important. Second, your central nervous system, brain, brainstem, everything is plastic. It's very, very plastic. The more you do, the better you're at it. Okay, that's obvious. So you keep training yourself. However, when there's less input, when there's negative, there are factors that negatively impact our brain, hearing loss, aging, or anything like that, it does negatively impact your brain's activity to do at least auditory related functions. Last but certainly not least, I hope that everybody can take away from this is that auditory input, your hearing aids, or even just keep watching TV, all those, any kind of input, implants, or audiobooks, or anything, talk to your friends, any kind of input, as much as you can. Auditory inputs will help your brain for that matter, to sort of recover, if you may, or improve upon whatever it was, whatever stage it was at with hearing loss. So it can recover and it will recover, provided that you give the brain, the ears give the brain the signals, that much of sounds. So any kind of things like hearing aids, cochlear implants, auditory training, and a lot of that's what we teach our doctoral students to teach them. It's not just, you're not just putting a pair of hearing, that's, I can be honest, the last thing I hated are just hearing aid people sell hearing aids, right? They give a pair of hearing aids, they put it on you. What they don't do is auditory training. What they explain these things to you. They give them your plans, how to use that. There's a lot of things in addition just to devices, a pair of devices. So I think a lot of times it's this part, the auditory training, that matters. And that's why I always tell my students, like, hey, they can buy, you can get a pair of hearing aids anywhere, but it's your expertise in explaining these things to them, how their brain works, how their brain will improve after keeping the sound. So I personally view hearing aids and cochlear implant not as devices. I view them as part of your auditory rehabilitation process. Just like your, if some of you did a rehab, right? If you hold a crane, it's just part of it, right? Like glasses. Glasses is just glasses, but I still need to train myself to get used to that. I need to adapt myself lifestyle to use that. So it's a whole process of auditory training, not just some device. So I hope I'm doing well on time. And then takeaway is I made that meme myself. Keep calm and sound on. Make sure there's sound, please. If your spouse, your friends, family member, and whoever, it's good that at least you guys are here listening to the talk. Hopefully it's helpful. But for those people who are around you, if you have any chance, tell them it's not about the ears. It's about your brain. If you don't have it, literally, you lose it. More importantly, if you give the sound back, keep the sound out, they will regain the function. Okay, so with that, I want to thank you And I want to thank our moderators here, Adria and Ann. I don't know if she's still here. And then I need to do questions here. You guys can type in the chat. And definitely, I need to do a plugin for our tremendous clinicians at Stockton and San Francisco campuses. They are helping people. They're training our students. They've been doing a tremendous job for our community and training the doctoral students. Well, I guess call today to schedule an appointment. I didn't even see that. 45 is, free chargeable. So that aside, if you guys have any question, please type in, or Adria, do you want them to speak up or type?
Yep, either or. I think we can start with the 2 questions in the chat, and then if there's more, we can address those. So the first question is, are hearing aids officially considered medical devices? If yes, do they have to meet FDA standards?
That's an excellent question. Hearing aid, to my knowledge, now I'm not like hearing a guru, I don't know everything. I don't know everything. My research interested in primarily in neuroscience and auditory training, but I'm a clinician, so I do know quite a bit of that. Hearing aid is a type of medical devices, and it's heavily regulated by FDA. That I do know. Now, there are a lot of what I would call hearing devices, amplifier hearing devices, that don't really fit the very tight description of FDA regulation. So technically, they are not hearing aids. They shouldn't be calling them hearing aids. I know there are a lot of commercials on TV, on internet. They are like, hey, these are hearing aids. That's borderline not okay. It's actually not borderline. They're not okay. And they will get into trouble if somebody say, hey, they're not hearing aids. For some device to be considered hearing aids, they have to be dispensed by a certified or trained professionals. So those ones you can buy over the internet, over the counter. People call that over the counter hearing aids. That is being pushed right now by the Biden administration. It could be that thing could change in the near future. But as is, my understanding, Adria, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that over the counter, over the internet, they're still not technically hearing aids. They're devices that help you hear better. They amplify certain sounds, but they don't fall under the strict FDA guidelines. Okay.
Perfect. The next question is, if second language studied as sign, will the brain enjoy the same changes?
Well, that's excellent. I mean, there's a lot of things here. Oh, I got excited talking about that, right? So, but you have to define enjoy and define sign. Okay, so second language learning, adulthood definitely will change your brain to a certain degree. But the matter of fact is that change, first off, that change actually, first step is that change in your brain actually help with that language you're learning. Okay, because you're exposed to that specific second language. Obviously, that will help you. So if I'm learning Spanish now, my brain will do better at Spanish. Will that help me understand French or German? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe that's a direction that we'll look at. But I just genuinely don't know. But I do know is that if I try to learn Spanish now, my brain will try to adapt for me to learn to use Spanish better. That for sure, I know. But will that change translate to, will that help me understand or learn German better? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I just genuinely don't know. Okay. I have a couple of do you have more? I have a couple of questions on my direct.
Yep. One more that says, are there hearing aids in training for those who are working musicians, singers, or performers?
That's okay. So that's a very important question. And so I gave you a few layers. Number one, I go to our university's Conservative of Music every year to give a talk to the young musicians to protect their hearing, to wear hearing protection and all that, because hearing loss is an occupational hazard to musicians. Okay, that's number one. Number two, musicians are notoriously hard. You probably know this. Any clinician knows this. Musicians are notoriously hard to, for the lack of a better word, to satisfy with hearing aids or cochlear implants, because hearing aids and all these things out there, they're designed for speech. They are not designed for music things. So there's that. Number three, Training definitely will help you. Okay, auditory training. So one recommendation I always give my patients who really focus on want to need hearing aids that you can use a lot of headphones. You can use a lot if you want to try to enjoy music. Headphones, a lot of times, those are better than hearing aids. They are better than hearing aids. They give you the fidelity of the music. All right. But if you want to talk to people, you're gonna need to use hearing aids. Okay. So yes. So that's a long answer to a short question. Training hearing aids will help music singers, performers. But the question is how satisfied you are. The expectations of how much you're going to get out of these devices, that needs to be calibrated. If you're talking about satisfaction about speech, about conversation, yes, they will help you a lot. Auditory training, hearing aid, they will help you a lot. But if you're talking about music perception, all right, because musicians are all tuned to like this perfect pitch and whatever, that expectation needs to be more realistic. Okay. I have a direct question of I hear sounds but can't always understand the words. Will hearing aids help me? Absolutely. Hearing aids will absolutely help you. And that's actually a great question. This is where we were talking about. Remember that the question can't always understand the words, right? The part about understanding the words, detection is one thing. That hearing aids will definitely help you. Discrimination, that hearing aids will help you too. But the identification, if I'm saying cat or fat, right? Cat or fat, that part, cat or fat, right? That part, that detection or identification will have to be done by your brain. And then understanding it's a cat, it's a fat cat unless, but that part will have to be dealt by your brain. And without hearing aids, your brain is gradually losing their ability to tell the difference between cat or fat. So if you don't have auditory input, 5-10 years later, then you put on a pair of hearing aids or cochlear implant, your brain can no longer or as effectively tell the difference between cat or fat, right? Between the cat or fat. So will that recover then? Sure, but very, very slowly. So definitely hearing aids will not only help you detect the difference, will not only help your ears to detect the difference, differentiate the difference. More importantly, from neuroscience perspective, it will help train your brain to keep up with the ability to tell the difference between the cat and the fat. Unless you're using a visual cue to tell a fat cat and skinny cat. That's a different story, right? We're to talk about auditory input. So hopefully that's helpful. I have a question about what brain training does University of Pacific offer? I think both Stockton and SF Clinic, we have auditory rehab services. And when you're coming for services, audiology services and all that kind of things, they also talk to you about strategies, about, all the things that at the very beginning that I was talking about. Like these things. They have rehabilitation software, they have rehabilitation support groups. A lot of times they will talk you through about these, train you, give you understanding, form a plan for you, the auditory rehab services, right? So they're gonna teach you through that and give you different kind of things, different kind of services along that. So that's another thing that we hear with these tremendous clinicians, both in SF as in clinic, in Stockton. They actually, I like them a lot. They really do a good job helping the patients, not just slap a pair of hearing aids on them and stuff like that. Okay, they're doing a tremendous job. And actually, Gil is involved with a study that I did, that I'm doing right now, and Fadi and Celia, they're actually doing a lot of studies of themselves too. So we have a lot of research going on with the clinic. So that's one thing that we try to feed back. Like what I'm doing right now is feeding back the knowledge, if you may, to the patients. Okay. Any other questions?
There's none in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, now there's one. It says, which study on your slides that seem to say better brain activity in auditory processing means better performance on cognitive tests?
Cognitive tests, I think this cognitive test. This guy will be a good cognitive test. This one will do, okay? It's a better brain activity, and this one will do. This one will do, okay? And I'm just picking a few studies that I found very interesting. There are a lot of studies out there, and these are peer-reviewed papers. There are a lot of white papers out there, trade journals, white papers. The fact that hearing loss nowadays, the fact that hearing loss and cognitive decline is linked is a fact. All right, I personally don't like some of the reps or salesperson trying to use that as a scare tactic, in a way. But I do know that they are very much linked, and there's a significant correlation between hearing loss and an increased probability, likelihood of getting a dementia. I never want to tell people, oh, you have hearing loss, you don't wear hearing aids, you're gonna have dementia. We don't know that. There are a lot of factors, but cognitive functions, we know that from all these studies, they are shown to have, like, this is one of those cognitive tests, the perception of loudness. They are shown to be directly, it can be as a result of direct auditory input. More sounds coming in, better brain activity, better at cognitive decline. Better at cognitive decline, better at cognitive performances. Okay. Another thing that President, I actually joke about this with my students, is that I will get to the question a little bit. I don't know if you guys remember last year, a couple of years ago, President, what's his name? Trump. He was saying there was a cognitive test, right? That he was doing. That test is called a MoCA. That's a screening cognitive test. You can look it up, MoCA. You can look it up. You can literally Google it. It's a well-known, well-defined cognitive decline or screening for cognitive functions. People have shown that with more or less hearing loss or more or less cognitive functions, auditory functions, there's direct relationship with that MoCA score to hearing loss or hearing aid use. People have shown that. So that's a very, very easily accessible tool. You can just do it. You can even do that yourself. So. All right. Question: must hearing aids used consistently, or can it be used after initial correction period as a booster refresher course for the brain? Use that all the time. Okay. So that's what this is about. The sound needs to be on. All right. Your brain needs constantly be fed with stimulation. Okay. It is not something that what's the word? You add a little booster here and there. It's just like a gas. It's just like a car. You need pumping gas, electricity in there to keep it going. Okay. If you don't have juice there, it will slow down, and eventually will just get like cars. You drive it once in a while. You keep driving it. You can't just like leave it there, and 10 years ago you won't start. So keep your hearing aids on. Oh, well, I guess I didn't mention this. If you can, always go with a pair of hearing aids. Okay. If money is an issue, if anything else is an issue, always go with a pair of hearing aids instead of one. You need both ears, both sides of auditory input to process sound better. A lot of functions like localization, a lot of functions like speech and noise understanding requires 2 ears. Okay, so I run into that with some of our patients too. Is that can we do 2 year? Can we just do one? And sometimes money is an issue. It's like I'd rather you have a pair of cheaper devices, and I'll help you do a lot of these trainings. And guys, if you Google auditory training, there are a lot of resources online. If you go to audiologists, they will do they have LACE programs, a lot of programs you can do. If you don't go to audiologists, at least Google it. You can, on YouTube, there are a lot of very easy, very straightforward auditory training programs. You can do it at home. To say the least, I tell you something that's really, really simple. You watch TV with your hearing aids on, okay? With your hearing aids on, you watch TV, then you force yourself to read the closed captioning. That in itself is a auditory training. What are you doing? Your hearing aids is helping your brain to associate certain words that you see on the screen to the sound you hear from the screen, from the TV. Keep doing that. You're gonna establish that relationship, because you need that association between certain sounds and differencing sounds and the words. And you haven't had that because of hearing aids, because of hearing loss. Now you have hearing aids, right? So that's the simplest you can do. Formal auditory training, if I give some examples of formal auditory training, there's this program called LACE, L-A-C-E, LACE program. It's developed by colleagues in UCSF. It's I don't know actually how long, a month or two, several weeks. They actually track your performances. They actually give you, and it's online. It used to be on CD, it's online. That's a tremendous tool, and you can look up literatures and on the effectiveness of auditory training. So there's that. And for children, I don't know how many people here have, are children or whatever, or parents of children with hearing loss. For children, there are a lot of trainings for auditory rehabilitation, auditory processing issues. And another thing is, things that work on kids can also work on adults and older adults. All right, you guys, I don't know if you guys have thought of it that way. So when we're children, when your grandchildren or children try to learn languages, there are certain things we teach them to learn language, tell the words apart. They will also work for adults too. It just, the material might look a little silly with kites, kites or boys, girls, those kind of things, footballs. Is there special training for SSD? Do you mean by single-sided deafness? Yes, there are. And I am not an expert on SSD. I heard there are stuff like that. I did not pay much attention to that. So sorry, I can't, I don't want to speak for anything that I'm not expert on. But I do know there are trainings, or at least evidence to show that SSD, single-sided deafness, after a certain period of time, there's some evidence of increased performances. I know there are evidence for that, but I just have not thoroughly read into that genre or area of research. Okay. Thank you. Really appreciate the data presented. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are any other questions that come up that you think of later or down the road or anything, just feel free to reach out to either clinic at University of the Pacific, either in Stockton or San Francisco. They'd be happy to chat further with you all about these topics and your questions. And thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.